First off, I want to thank you all for coming out today. We didn't want to do this as a formalized press conference, but just rather media availability. So I appreciate you guys all being here for this town, this community, and these families, because this story needs to be continued to be told. And I don't want to cut short what you're going to hear from the Department of Justice here in a little bit, from Mayor Garland and others that have created this report. I want to thank the Department of Justice, first off, for putting down what we've already known in black and white. That is the resounding thing that I've heard from several families that I've talked to today, that it's written down. That doesn't mean that we're done here, nor should it be. We need to have justice for these families, and we need to have real accountability. I also want to thank the Biden administration. This president has done a lot for this community. He has done a tremendous amount of work for the United States in trying to get us to a safer place in America. For the first time in 30 years, created the Safer Communities Act, a good first start, but a long way to go. And so my comments today will be brief. My concern with the report, I think that the report is well done. I think that it's thorough. And I think that it, as I begin to read it, and will continue to read it, finds recommendations and conclusions that I think are important for the public to know. Not the least of which is that every law enforcement agency that arrived at this scene on May 24th of 2022, some 20 months ago, had a lack of urgency. That word is replete in this report. A lack of urgency. There was a lack of leadership. It does isolate two of the local police officers, the acting chief of police, Mariano Pargas. It isolates Arredondo and his comments and his actions in that report. But I think it's also important to know that the Department of Public Safety had over 96 officers on this scene last May, and not once did they ever take control of this site. And they knew better. They had the equipment and the means to breach those rooms. Indeed, there's not a whole lot in this report that we don't already know and that you haven't already broken to the public. Not a whole lot. But I think that in the final conclusion, I think the only solace that we can take from it is that it's finally in black and white and in writing for all of us to see. The report, like I said, I want to let the Justice Department do its work, but it's replete with chapters on faulty communication, miscommunication post-incident, miscommunication from the Department of Public Safety, miscommunication to the parents. I think it is replete with information about the lack of trauma care that was sorely lacking. You'll know that I sued the state of Texas, and after that lawsuit, I ended up signing a non-disclosure agreement, and I've seen 400 hours of body cam footage. I've seen images of children being dragged out by their limbs into a hallway. I'm not a trauma care surgeon. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if that's the way you're supposed to do things. But it was abundant to me and my staff that something went wrong in the post-incident piece as well. Somehow a teacher was left to die in an ambulance for 45 minutes because they couldn't move that ambulance. Helicopters that stayed in the airport a mile and a half away didn't come on and land at that school to take those souls out of there that did have a pulse, 4 of which died on the way to the hospital. The biggest conclusion that we can all take is something we've already known for the last year and a half or more. And that's the Department of Public Safety should have known better. Its failed leadership and its infrastructure failed this community and failed rural Texas. The local police failed this community. And more importantly, as the Justice Department tells us, in that document that is sealed by them, it tells us that there was a complete and utter lack of urgency when it came to taking care of these children and to understanding that this was an active shooter situation. And so I'll open it up for any questions that you might have. Like I said, they have a story to tell you that's more in-depth than I do. It's their document. I've read portions of it this morning. I was briefed by them briefly last night. I'm not here to rain on their parade, but this isn't about who gets the kudos for anything. This is about finding justice for families. And heretofore, they haven't gotten any. There's no justice for these families. By the way, there's not an amount of money that's going to bring their kids back. But sadly, in all of this gross negligence that occurred on May 24th here in Uvalde, Texas, all of these agencies are covered by something called governmental immunity. So for me, the message that I can send to a governor and a state legislature that did nothing for 5 months and 4 special sessions to help this community and these families, did absolutely nothing, is go back in the next legislative session, give these parents permission to sue the state of Texas for their gross failure, their gross negligence that occurred. That's what I'll keep fighting for, so that these families can have some kind of justice at that courthouse across the street, so that they can have some kind of solace that their children didn't die in vain. And then secondarily, we need to change the policies in this country on gun violence and access to guns, because nowhere should an 18-year-old be able to access an AR-15, go in and buy hundreds of rounds of ammunition on the next day, and on the third day pick up his AR-15 that he bought on the internet at the same small gun shop in the same small town, and nobody even thought that that was a significant event. So I thank you for coming out. We've been at this now for a long time, you and I, and the public. I'll continue to talk about this until the day I die. Never did I ever think that I would see dead children in a classroom. These angels die like we train them to die. In their active shooter drills that they have, they live with a kind of anxiety, our children, that we never had to deal with. They shut the lights down, they closed the blinds. There was nowhere to hide, so they huddled together. They died in 2 piles on top of each other in that second classroom. 2 teachers trying to shield their kids and safeguard them. 1 teacher dead, 1 barely living. We've got to learn from what happened in Uvalde, Texas. It's my hope that at least this report tells the entire world that we need to have some real change. Do something in Spanish, sure. La tragedia que sucedió el 24 de mayo fue algo muy horrible. Y gracias a Dios, ni siquiera hoy tenemos, en ese reporte que usted tiene en sus manos, tenemos ya en concreto conclusiones y recomendaciones. Y las conclusiones fueron simples. Que todos los policías ese día fallaron a esos niños, fallaron al público, fallaron a los padres de esos niños en comunicaciones, y fallaron principalmente porque hubo ninguna urgencia para parar ese tiroteo. Y eso es lo que dice la conclusión más grande de ese reporte. Yo he visto todos estos videos y he visto policías decir que hay una AR-15, ambos policías diciendo y quejándose de eso, y uno diciendo que no quería morir. I need to say this in English. The largest refrain from the audio that I've seen, the 400 hours of audio and body cam footage that I've seen, was from cops. There's an AR-15 in there. There's an AR-15. We've got to be careful. There's an assault rifle. And the biggest and most profound of all of those utterances was one cop saying, I don't want to be killed today. I don't want to get clapped out today. Those children didn't want to be killed either. I hope that people in this country remember this incident for the rest of their lives. Because in some way we're all responsible. We've allowed Republicans to pass loose Republican gun laws in this state that have kept our children unsafe. And our lack of participation in this electoral process has put these animals in power. These people that don't care about our kids. Any other questions?
Se habla de justicia. Este reporte revela poco o casi nada nuevo de lo que estas familias ya saben. Casi los 400 policías que llegaron fallaron. Eso ya lo saben estas familias. falta para que eso suceda?
Tenemos una fiscal que no ha hecho nada. Que no ha hecho nada en 20 meses, según buscando quién va a castigar. No ha castigado a nadie. Y si castiga a 2 personas, como dice este reporte de que los 2 oficiales, Vargas y Arredondo, debe de castigar muchos más, y muchos bajo del Departamento de Seguridad Pública. Y eso es justicia que se debe de llevar a cabo. Pero esta señora no lo ha hecho y no lo va a hacer. Y eso es imperdonable. Y este gobernador no va a hacer nada para remediar el dolor de esa gente. Y yo sé que una cantidad de dinero no lo va a hacer, pero por protecciones de inmunidad, ellos no pueden tener esa justicia, aunque sea monetaria, aunque nunca sea justicia o suficiente. Estos republicanos que controlan este estado quebrado, roto, no van a hacer nada para este público. Esto es la matanza de nuestros niños hispanos. He asked me, where's the justice in all of this? For the families that I've talked to for the last 20 months and helped along the way to try to get some justice in all of this space, this is a little consolation, and there is no justice. There's no justice until some cops get indicted for their malfeasance. I doubt that day will ever come. And if Christina Mitchell thinks she's going to indict a couple of cops, that's all well and good. But the fact is, she needs to indict a whole bunch more. A whole bunch of people with the Department of Public Safety that did absolutely nothing. Let me remind you, at the 76-minute mark, the head cop with the Department of Public Safety, Joel Betancourt, radioed in. Thank goodness the radios didn't work. Team that is about to breach, do not go in. I repeat, do not go in. How much longer did the Department of Public Safety want these kids to suffer and wait? Or maybe it was just bad optics for them that a federal team went in to do their job for them. Pretty sick. They wanted to be treated like heroes. That's why they controlled every press conference, and that's mentioned in this report as well. The Department of Public Safety and this governor failed these children, wanted to come out and have this hero story. You'd think that this feeble governor, after 24 hours of noticing what happened here, someone would have briefed him on the fact that his cops took 77 minutes to go in there, but that didn't happen. This state is broken on so many things. It shed some light for me on all of it. We need to fight back, and the first part of that fight is telling the truth. And that's why you're so important. Really, you members of the media need to keep telling the truth about what's broken in this state. And it's all broken. And we deserve so much more and so much better than we've got.
I have a question. The narrative you keep saying, they kept saying they are in there, they are. Why wasn't the narrative there are kids in there? There are kids in there.
Those cops were cowards, and those kids were braver than the cops. At about the 20-minute mark, there was a call from Chloe Torres. Chloe said, we're in here. Come get us. And no help came. Thank God Chloe made it. Some of her friends didn't make it. And here's the sad part about all of this. What would have happened if they'd have done their job? They didn't kill these kids, I get that. What would have happened if they'd have gone in at minute 12? How many kids would be alive today? They all need to explain themselves to us. There was a memo that was exposed by one of the agencies in one of the news stories, an internal memo with DPS, where Steve McCraw says, relax. No one's going to get fired over this. There's been no accountability at this agency. One man they said was fired was allowed to retire. And the other Texas Ranger, they said they fired, is still on the payroll, $100,000 later sitting on his couch. Steve McCraw will tell me, well, that's because the DA's investigation isn't done yet. You all heard in that leaked story several months ago where more than one, more than two, and more than 5 cops uttered about that gun. These cops were afraid of that gun. They don't have the decency and the fortitude to go into that building in Dawson or into the halls of Washington as law enforcement and say, do something about this gun, because it's a killer. It's a killer of kids. It's a killer of human beings. It's a war rifle and nothing more. I have a whole lot of guns, and I fired that one. Most powerful gun I've ever fired. We need to do something about this for sure. I want to thank you all today for coming. I know that if you don't have any further questions, I'm sure they're waiting on you down the hall. They moved their press conference to 11 down the street.